They have nowhere to go after being driven out from their homes. We are not talking a few hundred or thousand, but a staggering 65.3 million around the world are forced to live as refugees, a record high according to the United Nations.
A new report released on Monday by the United Nations Refugee Agency says 56.3 million people were displaced by the end of 2015. It is the first time in UNHCR's history that the threshold of 60 million has been crossed. 3 countries alone count for more than half of the 21.3 million refugees worldwide, with 4.9 million Syrians, 2.7 million Afghans, and 1.1 million Somalis. There are also some 40.8 million people internally displaced in countries in conflict.
Last year, there was 59.3 million refugees and asylum seekers in the world, and in 1 year, over 5 million people forced to flee their homes. And this is really scaring, because this means that there is one person among 113 people in the world is forced to flee, is displaced.
Global displacement has roughly doubled since 1997 and risen by 50% since 2011 alone, when the Syria war began.
In the last 5 years, the number has grown dramatically. It's because 15 wars have been erupted in the world, and that is the main cause of the refugees. This is the main producer of the refugees, wars and conflicts. And if we witness, like in this region, Syria, for example, for the last 5 years, war still continues, and Syria is the largest humanitarian situation in our era, with 4.9 Syrian refugees registered in the region and 6.4 internally displaced people inside Syria.
The United Nations says refugees and asylum seekers are in urgent need of shelter, water, decent food, education opportunities, health services, and employment opportunities. World Refugee Day is a reminder to the international community to do more in order to stop the wars, so that the displaced people can go back home. Bureau reports, ANN 7.
I am now joined on Skype by Tina Jelly, spokesperson of the UNHCR's Regional Office for Southern Africa. Tina, good evening to you, and thank you for joining us on Africa Tonight.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Now, when we look back, forced displacement has been on the rise since mid-1990s. Why are we seeing the numbers hitting record highs now?
Well, now, we're seeing increasing conflict. We have Syria, where there are, millions that have been forced to flee the country. In Africa, we've had new displacements outside of Burundi, with over 200,000 fleeing Burundi in the last year. And then there's also the protracted refugee situations like Somalia, with over 3 decades of conflict, and you still have refugees outside that country.
So when we are comparing, the number of people who are living on Earth, which is sitting at 7 odd billion, the population of people on Earth, and we look at the number of refugees that are increasing, how are we, the UNHCR, going to tackle the rise in numbers?
Well, the rise in numbers is definitely causing a strain on the humanitarian aid that we can provide. With increasing numbers, it's becoming very difficult. When countries want to force people to stay in camps, you're locking up a bunch of human potential, and they become completely dependent on humanitarian aid. So for UNHCR, we're trying to encourage governments to look at refugees not just as a burden, but as people who can contribute to the communities, who bring skills to their new host countries, and that can really contribute, because we really need to welcome them and look at unlock their potential rather than just lock them away until potentially the conflicts ends in their home countries.
When we look at people who have been forced, to flee their homes, but were within rather the confines of their own countries, how does this affect neighboring countries, and what kind of economic ramifications are we looking at having to aid and help refugees or asylum seekers?
Well, the people who haven't been, who are displaced within their own countries, we call them internally displaced people, and those numbers are even higher than the number of refugees. The number of refugees is nearly 20 million, and what happens is in countries like Turkey or other countries where they put them in camps, then they're forced to sit there in the camps, and they have to depend on international aid for food, for assistance, to do everything. And we see that when that happens over a number of years, there are a lot of social problems that happen in the camps. But in places like South Africa or other countries where people are allowed freedom of movement and are able to integrate and are able to contribute to their societies and use their skills to help, build we have doctors, nurses, lawyers, people who have been forced to flee. When they can contribute to the economy, they all help. I mean, even George Bizos, who was one of Nelson Mandela's attorneys, he was a refugee from World War II who came to South Africa. So we really have to look at the potential that the refugees can give.
When we look at things like, integration, are we looking at health hazards when it comes to, those who are living in camps, and in terms of how they are taken care of?
Well, there's actually no evidence to show that any refugees bring impact on the health conditions. But on the contrary, they're actually more vulnerable if they're forced into camps and have to live there together with lack of sanitation or lack of water, and that really affects them. So we have to rather look at how we can integrate them and look at how they can contribute to the local communities, and then that way they're actually contributing members to their new host countries rather than being seen as a burden.
Tina Gilly, thank you so much for your time.